And for more on this story now, we speak to SABC News correspondent at the UN in New York, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, and he's been covering the developments in this case since its inception in December last year. Sherwin, thank you so much for your time. I mean, remind us what South Africa is asking for here and what the court might decide.
Well, essentially the case that South Africa is making now, Bongiwe, is that the provisional measures handed down by the International Court of Justice, right, first in January and then amended provisional measures in March, South Africa is arguing that those measures cannot fully address the changed circumstances that Palestinians are experiencing on the ground in Gaza, in particular due to the military offensive where those 1.4 million Palestinians were seeking refuge in the southern city of Gaza. Of course, close to 1 million of those people have now been displaced, some for the fourth or the fifth time. And let me read you a bit from South Africa's application. Quote, "The situation brought about by the Israeli assault on Rafah and the extreme risk it poses to humanitarian supplies and basic services into Gaza, to the survival of the Palestinian medical system, and to the very survival of Palestinians in Gaza as a group is not only an escalation of the prevailing situation, but gives rise to new facts that are causing irreparable harm to the rights of the Palestinian people in Gaza." And so South Africa, based on that argument, is asking the court to immediately withdraw and cease its, order Israel to immediately withdraw and cease its military offensive in the Rafah governorate. The state of Israel shall immediately take all effective measures to ensure and facilitate the unimpeded access to Gaza of the United Nations and other officials engaged in the provision of humanitarian assistance. South Africa is also calling for the admission of investigators and of journalists into the enclave in order to investigate and assess and report on developments on the ground, and also wants the court to ensure that Israel shall ensure that its military does not act to prevent such access, provision, preservation and retention. So that's very specific. South Africa essentially saying stop this military offensive in Rafah and more broadly stop the military offensive in Gaza as a whole. Will the court now accede? Will it accept South Africa's arguments or will it reject South Africa's arguments? Right? That's the speculation. The two options we have here. Essentially, the court can order Israel to withdraw or to stop here, but it could also just say, well, we've already handed down provisional measures. Maybe it's time that Israel starts implementing them. Groups like the Human Rights Watch released a statement on March 7th saying that Israel is contravening the ICJ's legally binding orders by obstructing the entry of life-saving aid and services into Gaza. But of course, as you well know, Bongo, where Israel argues that it is allowing humanitarian aid into Gaza. But of course, organizations like the United Nations and many aid organizations around the world say that it is not happening at the scale that is requisite to the need on the ground.
Now, Sherwin, of course, it does raise the issue of implementation and compliance with the court's order, and the jury is out as to whether Israel is complying with the previous orders to date. I mean, let alone the ones that are now possibly pending before the court.
I mean, the UN Charter, the statute that created the International Court of Justice, is very clear. Article 93 says all members of the United Nations are ipso facto, by virtue of their membership of the United Nations, parties to the statute of the International Court of Justice. Article 94 of the Charter says each member of the United Nations undertakes to comply with the decisions of the International Court of Justice in any case to which it is a party, right? And the court has already established that based on the accusation from South Africa that Israel is not complying with its obligations as it relates to the Genocide Convention of 1948, the court has established its jurisdiction, that there is a dispute between the two parties, and therefore, based on its rulings here, the parties are bound by that ruling. It also says in Article 94 of the UN Charter, Bongi, if any party to a case fails to perform the obligations incumbent upon it under the judgment of the court, the other party may have recourse to the Security Council. So, were the court to say Israel was to stop its military offensive in Rafah, were the court to say Israel has to withdraw its military offensive from Gaza completely, South Africa would then have recourse to the UN Security Council, which could then sort of pass a resolution affirming the court's order. It could threaten sanctions, but of course you then have the same problem of makeup in the council where a certain country will have a veto and will protect its ally, as we've seen on so many occasions in the past. But let's take the Israelis at their word in this instance. The Israeli government spokesperson spoke to this issue as we await the court's judgment tomorrow. This is what he had to say. Watch.
No power on earth will stop Israel from protecting its citizens and going after Hamas in Gaza. We will destroy Hamas. We will return peace and security to the people of Israel and to the people of Gaza. We cannot go on with a genocidal terrorist regime on our southern border. We will destroy Hamas.
So the strong sense we get from the Israeli government spokesperson is that Israel is probably not going to comply were the ICJ to make additional provisional measures. The Security Council, given its current makeup and the veto power of the United States, is unlikely, therefore, to enforce or pass a resolution to enforce or uphold the ICJ's judgment. So we might just be going around in a circle here, Bongiwe. But what we will have is a very clear, legally binding order from the World Court, which all member states of the United Nations are subject to, whether they implement the orders or not.
And of course, all eyes on the World Court tomorrow, Sherwin, and we'll continue then to monitor this through your eyes as well. Thank you so much for your time. That was Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News correspondent.